My dad was an Iowa farm boy, and at age 17, he left home and moved to Rogers, Arkansas to live with his older brother, and got a job in the lime kiln for $1 a day. And one evening he was down at the pool hall, standing out on the porch, and the local Salvation Army man went down the street beating the drum. He was having a meeting that night. And my dad thought, well, anybody that get out on a cold, rainy night like this must have something. So he followed Mr. Olson down to the Salvation Army hut, where he was converted. We were in church and Sunday school every Sunday. We had Bible study at home. My dad was gone quite a bit. We always at the breakfast table had devotion. And it was a wonderful, happy home, and I never heard anyone in our home make any complaints, except the one bathroom.
I don't remember, much. More from stories that other people have told me. Quite often jokes that he told. There's one I used to use. And speaking of little Johnny, the pastor asked little Johnny at the children's church if he knew where God lives. And Johnny said, "Yes, Pastor, I know where God lives." And Pastor, you ask one too many questions, says, well, where does God live? And the little boy said, well, he lives in the bathroom at our house. And the pastor said, oh, really? And he said, yes, every day my daddy goes and knocks on the door and says, good Lord, are you still in there?
It has been the realization, almost from the hour of my conversion, that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Earlier in these talks, I made the statement that every great picture and every great poem and every great book and every beautiful building were first thoughts in the minds of their creators, that the world itself was first a thought in the mind of God. Just so, those schools standing back there in the Ozark Hills that have become great lighthouses of hope to multitudes across the nation, they took shape and form in my mind long years before the first nail was driven. May I add, those schools never would have taken shape and form in brick and mortar and stone and steel without first taking shape and form in the mind of the man who at last, under God, started the movement for making these buildings real. Thoughts are things.
And at homecoming or with people I'd see often, they would pat me on the head. The worst ones were the cheek pinchers, well, there's little Johnny, and I guess we know what you're going to be when you grow up, don't we? And so I certainly understood that there was a John Brown Sr. and a John Brown Jr., and that I was the third John Brown. And I probably, as I reached my teen years, that became something of an issue for me. There was no pressure, expectation on his part that you're going to come to work at JBU when you graduate. But I knew I wanted to go to law school. So I came back, majored in business, which I found much more relevant. Dr. Mark Gilbert at the time, wonderful professor, and had an influence on many, many of our alumni through the years. In fact, to study for the bar exam, I used my college textbook on business law. It was such a good general summary of all these different facets of the law that I'd studied over 3 years. So I kind of came to a decision point there about the third year of law school. Am I going to become a lawyer? I could have gone on active duty with military, and I used to say this to faculty. I'm not sure they quite believed me or accepted it, but I said I came for the same reason you did. I felt God's call in my life. This was a door that was open to me. I knew I was the third John Brown, but where else could I have gone and served the Lord in such an immediate fashion?
We were invited to lunch in Fort Worth, Texas, to the Fort Worth Club. And Mr. Sid Richardson, who was a very wealthy oil man, And the mayor of Fort Worth, they invited us to the Fort Worth Club for lunch. And at that lunch, they proposed that they had some land out northeast of Fort Worth, between Fort Worth and Dallas, where they'd build him a school and endow it. And they guaranteed if he'd move his school down there, they would take care of all the problems of finance. Well, Dad didn't think very long. He just said, "Gentlemen, God led me to start a school in Northwest Arkansas, and that's where we're going to stay." And that convinced me that this was the place to be. Actually, the property they were talking about is now DFW Airport.
One of the things that I think, I'm not sure I know I didn't fully understand when I was just in the application process, was the importance of some of the foundational support of JBU, in particular the Chapman Trust. It has given well over $63 million to the university over 30-some years. And listening to John Jr. talk about his visits to Mr. Chapman, how he wouldn't sit down because he didn't want to take too much of Mr. Chapman's time, about how he would ask him to help them, sometimes just really meet payroll. And I think about the faithfulness of his development work. That is really now a blessing that we've felt currently, but throughout the time that the Chapman Trust has been about. With John Brown III, I value his opinion, but he'll say, "Listen, this is my opinion. This is what I think you should do. But you're the president of JBU. I'll support what you do." That there's a graciousness in his support that is about what's best for the institution, not necessarily what's best for him or the family or anything else. It's what's best for John Brown University.
In 1962, we reached accreditation. We had a committee of Dr. Rogine Weathers, Dr. Roger Cox, Dr. Dorothy Woodland, and they spent hours on the self-study and putting together all the requirements for accreditation. When we went before the committee in Chicago, why, we went right through. We celebrated. That was one of the greatest things that happened to JBU. The only regret that it happened after my father had passed on to heaven.
And I knew this engineering program was good enough to be accredited, without a doubt. But what we had to do was to get it all on the table, get it all on paper, get it all in front of the people the way the accrediting agencies want to hear it, just their way. And so with Jim Barnes here, an engineer with administrative experience, I asked him to work very closely with the engineering department. And they worked very hard writing numerous drafts of the application and getting ready for the visit. And when it came, they hit it out of the park. Shirley Thomas loved to talk about excellence because of Alpha Chi and the honors program. But when I asked her, "Would you like to grow this thing? Would you like to raise the standards?" she just absolutely jumped in and ran with it. And we talked about competition. Well, by 2003, they were recognized as the top chapter in the United States. Not a pretty good one in Northwest Arkansas, but the top chapter in the United States.
Well, in my first year, I had a really interesting experience because the basketball team won the national championship. And actually, the basketball tournament happened over spring break. And I had talked to the coach, Coach Shihai at the time, and I asked him, I sort of said, he goes, "Oh, don't worry about it. We might not even make the playoffs, I don't think." And so, but he won the last 5 out of 6 games during the regular season. He got an at-large bid. And so I talked to him right before he left. I said, "Listen, if you make the championship, I'll come. I got plans already. I'm going to be in Colorado with my family." And he says, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll maybe get through a round or two if we're lucky." And so they went to Kansas City and I went to Colorado. And after the first game, I looked up on the webpage, and sure enough, we had won. Second day, I looked up on the webpage. I had to go to the library in the ski town to find an internet access to see how we did. Third day came and we won again. Then I called him. I said, John, what are you doing to me? It looks like you're doing really well. He goes, oh, don't worry about it. I got a really tough game tomorrow. I'm not sure we'll make it. I said, listen, I made a commitment. You make it to the championship, I'll be there. He said, oh, okay, well, don't worry about it. Sure enough, I went to the library the next day, won again, called him again. He goes, well, you might want to buy a ticket. They come to the semifinals, and I'm thinking, well, my family's like, are you going to go or not? I said, if they win, I'm going to go. And so sure enough, I checked in the library the next day. We won, drove down to Denver, flew to Kansas City, and I was there when our team won the national championship.
Cole will run it across. Not going to foul as Cole going to throw it down the court, and the ball game is over. John Brown University out of Sutherland Springs, Arkansas. Your 2005 NAIA Men's Division I National Champions.
One of the things that was really a joy to discover was really the excellence of the faculty at JBU when I first came. And again, their commitment to educate students. And the quality of the students that are attracted to JBU. And so that has been something that's been really evidenced by when we compete. And we compete in speech and debate, when we compete in SIFE, when we compete in the Reynolds competition, when we compete in engineering. And it's a real joy to go, for instance, to a SIFE conference and walk through the convention hall, and people say, oh, you're from John Brown University. And so I get some of the credit for something that the students are doing. It's not everywhere I go where they say, oh, you're from John Brown University. But when we go to the SIFE competition, that's the way people respond.
One of the meetings I remember, fellow that was on our board had done well in business, but they wanted to have breakfast one morning on campus. And they said, we have always had a passion to help with the children of pastors and missionaries come to JBU. And they're in a position of Christian service where they can't always afford to pay tuition. We want to help. And we want to establish a $1 million scholarship fund out of the sale of our business. But we want to do it anonymously. We don't want anyone to know that we've done it. And, those are just special moments when people give truly, not only out of the generosity of their hearts, but the feeling that, God has provided for us beyond all measure, and we want to return that blessing to others.
There is all the difference in the world between the experience and its impact on the young person, the young adult, between secular higher education and Christian higher education, particularly Christian residential college higher education. The big difference is that JBU provides the faculty, the council, the roommates, the chaplain, the chapel, the classrooms, the integration of Christian faith and learning, the professional guidance in a Christian context, how to lead and serve, for the guidance for the rest of life. You're just not going to get that on most secular and public campuses. You still have to choose well. But here you have every opportunity to choose well for the rest of your life.
Well, I know one of my first experiences was, I think it was in my second board meeting. And we had a few articles in the Threefold Advocate. And, student newspapers are a wonderful blessing, but they also can be an interesting challenge. And those articles communicated, fairly so, that some of our students were struggling in the areas of sexual behavior and gambling and areas of living up to the community covenant. And they had gotten quite some press. And so I was coming up to the board meeting, and I had some people that were a little bit upset that this would be part of the JBU experience. And I was at the board meeting, and I tried to explain to the board. I said, yep, there's some problems. We don't have perfect students at JBU. They make mistakes. We believe in redemptive discipline, that we call people to account, we hold them accountable, but we don't just kick them out. And that working with 18 to 22-year-olds can be messy, and sometimes doesn't always look good, because that's what it takes to bring about change in people's lives. That's what an educational institution does. It helps them to train them and help them to understand their calling in life. intellectually, spiritually, behaviorally, in a variety of different ways. And as I was making that speech, I made my little speech to the board, and one of our older board members raised his hand to speak. And I thought to myself, well, it's been a good 9 months. I'll figure out a new career. And Terry Moose stood up, and he said, I just need to say one thing. He goes, I was a graduate from 1946 or 1948. He goes, there's nothing new under the sun. He goes, we had some of these same struggles when I was here. And he said, it isn't that we have struggles that we should be embarrassed about. It should be embarrassed if we don't respond and seek to bring about righteousness and redemption in folks that are struggling. And it was one of those moments where I said to myself, this is a place I can be. When I have board members like that understand our project, understand what we're trying to do, understand the challenges of working with young people, that felt like a good affirming moment. And one of the independent reporters for the New York Times called us and said, I'd like to come cover your first dance. And I have to say my first reaction was, please no, I don't want the New York Times to come to JBU because they're going to think that we're somehow backwards, or they don't understand our Christian context, and they just won't portray us fairly, is what I was worried about. I found out a little bit more about the reporter. The reporter actually was a PhD student or a PhD graduate from Yale. He had worked with Nicholas Walterstorff, who was a Calvin professor before he went to Yale. He knew something of our world. So that made me feel a bit better. But then he called and said, I'd like to come on Monday. And we said, well, the dance is until Friday. Why do you want to come Monday? He said, well, I just like to be around your campus, and I like to talk to people. And I thought, oh, wonderful. He's going to talk to folks. So he came. We opened the door. Again, part of this was about the philosophy, which is what we have to offer is something the world should want. And so we don't have to hide from it, that we should be able to express ourselves and give witness to the way in which we go about our lives in a way that is winsome, not just offensive. And so if the New York Times comes, let's use it as an opportunity to express who we are. He came. He was a little bit skeptical at first. I think it was the first time in Arkansas. And I will have to say what happened, at least my perception of what happened, was that the students won him over. Our students invited him to coffee. They invited him to Bible studies. They invited him to class. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, and he said it in the article as well, two things that I really appreciate in the article. One, he said, JBU students are the type of students that any university would want to have. They're curious, they're intelligent, they're committed, they're hardworking. So he recognized the quality of our students. The other thing he said, which I think was funny, but I also appreciate, he goes, JBU students were unusually polite. And I think some of that was, and he explained to me later, he said, I've grown up in some of the most privileged universities and schools in the country. He said, sometimes our students in those schools are really cynical about life. They see all the problems. They're very smart and intelligent, but in that smarts and intelligence, they see the dark side of things. He goes, your students are optimistic. They see possibilities rather than problems. And he goes, it's really refreshing to be with your students. I get asked this question often, particularly by prospective parents. And what I say to them is really I have two ways to answer the question. And the first way is what's our end vision? What is it that we're about? And that's the students that we graduate. So we should continue to be, as we have been in the past, a leading institution that educates students to seek God's calling in their whole life, that they won't make a separation between what happens in their life on Sunday and what happens Monday through Saturday, that they will be good parents, that they will be good husbands and wives, that they will be very good at their jobs, that they will be lifelong learners, that they will care about their community, they'll care about the environment, they'll care about politics, that they will be committed Christians that are engaging our culture to bring about God's kingdom. And to me, that is the vision of John Brown University.